This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Rock and Roll Denim, Bill Fick Ford, the WCRA, and Resistol.
Attention all rodeo athletes. Join us for the Cowtown Christmas Championship Rodeo in December. Over $360,000 in prize money in the historic Cowtown Coliseum in Fort Worth, December 14th through 17th. And no entry fees. Qualify using the VRQ for the Triple Crown of Rodeo $1 million cash bonus, featured on a CBS network broadcast. To get started, go to the App Store, download the WCRA Rodeo app, and hit nominate. This is your chance to rodeo in December. Nominate today or visit us at WCRArodeo.com.
Guys, another year has ticked by, challenging year, but there was somebody you could rely on if you needed a new Super Duty pickup, and that was Bill Fick Ford. Once again, the #1 Super Duty dealer in the entire country. You guys have seen what's going on in the car business, in the truck business. You're seeing trucks being sold for thousands above MSRP. Well, if you go to Bill Fick Ford, it doesn't matter where you are at in the continental U.S. He will take care of you. He will stand by the product, and he will not take advantage of you. Guys, Bill Fick Ford is the only place you can go in 2022 for a no-bull discount. Bill Fick Ford.
What sets Resistol apart is the legacy of the cowboys who wear the brand. These traditions are passed down from fathers to sons, from heroes to future champions. Since 1927, Resistol has been handcrafting the finest American-made cowboy hats. Generation after generation, we live it every day.
This is The Gauge with host Chance Conradu.
Are you freaking serious? It's Conrado. This is The Gauge, and I am Chance Conrado. On this episode of the podcast, we have got my buddy Jordan Weaver. Jordan's been on the podcast before, but this is an awesome episode. We get into so many things. It's so educational. It's a requirement that you listen to this one. Also, I owe everybody out there who loves The Gauge an apology. I know we haven't been here for a while. That's on me. I was in the middle of moving and doing a bunch of things. I had to take a month off to get all that done, but we back. Check it out. Well, Jordan, when you reached out to me about us doing another show, I was like, absolutely, because there's something that you and I had kind of talked about was you leaving your career, kind of. I don't know if you would have called it your life's work, but I guess you'd have to if that's what you do. And it's a really interesting thing, and I guess I don't really know any of the details about it, but you said once you were done with that process, we could talk about it. So I think that's a big portion of what I think it would be really great to get into the show, and then obviously let everything else go from there. You know how this works.
Heck yeah.
We just dabble.
Well, so since I was here last, lots of changes. You too. I mean, it seems like things have gone kind of nuclear here too.
Very.
Does it feel that way being here? Or is it? I'm observing from the outside.
So, well, I mean, it's caused me to do a lot of internalization and a lot of thinking on what this should be and what to do with it now that it is what it is. And it's cool. It's like, the Cowboy Channel picked it up. That's fun. And obviously a lot of people want to know more about it and hear about it and be on the show and do those things, which creates challenges in itself because you end up telling a lot of people no.
Are you still loving it as much now as you always have? Or is it starting to cool a little
You know
bit?
what? That hasn't waned, but there's a bigger responsibility now, is what I've noticed. And kind of like the message and the purpose has really changed a lot for me. Even if you just look at the tagline, inside the Western lifestyle, that's great. That's cool. We've talked to so many people. I mean, we've got hundreds of episodes at this point. We've talked to so many people, and it's like our world is in shambles right now. Yeah. And one of my big goals and kind of the purpose behind it, big long-term, and these guys know this because we talk about it, was to have something that transcended the Western life and specifically rodeo, right?
Right.
Because that's very segmented. You can only do so much there.
Right.
One of the things that is kind of amazing about our culture, and you know this, you're one of these people. You're a father. You have a family. But one of the amazing things about the Western culture, even just rural America, remove the cowboy part, but just that type of person, is some of the denigrations we have in our society, fatherless homes and a complete and total destruction of the family.
Right.
which a good society can't function without that. We're seeing that.
Right.
We've seen.
Right.
I mean,
that's the DNA of a culture.
That's the pillar of a culture. Without a strong family, mother, father, children, that whole nuclear family that for some reason people think they don't want that right now, or they're being told they shouldn't have that. Well, usually it's just people who didn't have it that are saying that, but that's not something that we have in our culture. It's not a problem here. It's not. Like, we don't have that problem here.
It's almost like in that regard, we're almost anti-cultural or countercultural, because it's like the areas I think that where we see our biggest strengths are mirrored in the biggest weaknesses in the culture that we're seeing. And maybe I don't want to put words in your mouth, but maybe what you're saying is it almost feels like there's a social responsibility to make that visible for people who are going like, hey, it doesn't seem like our approach is working. Like maybe what we're doing isn't working. We're not seeing the results. And so just to present another option that says, hey, this culture does this way and it works.
Yes. Yeah, you're 100% right. And it does feel like, and it might be self-induced responsibility. Nobody maybe thinks that it's a responsibility of the Gauge to do that, but I don't see anything else really doing it. And another cool thing that Gauge has done as a side note is it's inspired a lot of people to do similar things, like you.
Well, didn't you just do, was it Clint, I'm saying his name wrong. Didn't you just go do a podcast?
Clinton Anderson.
Clinton Anderson. I was going to say that. I thought that was wrong. You just went, he's starting one, right?
Yeah, his is done. He hasn't released the episode, but yeah. Yeah,
and is it going to be like a series, or is this like this new thing, or just a one-off?
No, so he's gonna. I mean, he's sunk a big investment into it, kind of like we did, and his is a totally different thing. He has no plans of talking to rodeo people necessarily. It's not a Western podcast. It's a more of a mainstream thing, and it's Clinton. It's going to be blunt. It's going to be pretty dirty.
Hey, I want to go on record with something. I want to go on record with something. It's a two-part statement. Mm-hmm. First of all, I'm not going to stand here and say that I fully, because if somebody goes back and listens to that episode, I'm like, Jordan told us to listen. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying no one has ever come across, like I've had more people send me his episodes of like, have you heard this specific lines, like recording little clips. That guy, he is landed in a place of honesty that's fun to get to observe.
Yeah, I think that might be one of the largest and most widespread pieces of media that's ever been captured
in a cowboy hat
ever.
Yeah.
Like the numbers are, it's terrifying almost how much power Clinton has for his message. But here's the thing about Clinton, and I have a really unique perspective on it because I talk to him all the time. I literally, if anybody asks me, hey, is Clinton one of your close people? I'd say absolutely. He's a mentor. He's out of freaking control in the best of ways, but he doesn't tell lies. He's 100% authentic, and he genuinely wants good for people. He's just an Australian, so he's gonna say fuck, shit, and that C word. That's like normalcy for them. It's just a different culture. So he's from somewhere else.
It's Canada from a different continent. It's just part of some more.
It is. Language. But he's not wrong.
Keep going. And the reason I'm saying keep going, I've got some notes right here. I want to make sure I've got. So me looking at my phone is not me texting.
No, it's fine. Sorry. As long as it's not ringing, I don't care. But his message is good, and his consultation that he's doing for people, it works.
Were you the first guest on it?
Yeah.
Heck yeah.
Yeah, I was. And
that's cool because no matter what, for the rest of the life of that whatever it is that he's building, you get to be the first one. That's an accomplishment. It's
a real honor. Yeah, when somebody like that wants you to kind of be their inaugural person.
Yeah.
But it just speaks to so what happens is a lot of people borrow someone's ideas, or they use inspiration. And I consulted him a lot on how to set this podcast up. Mm-hmm. And to show you what kind of a guy he is, the way that he honors that is he gives credit where credit's due.
Yeah.
That's all that was.
Yeah.
I helped, and he got the idea from me. He told everybody he got the idea from me, and so he brought me on and publicly let everybody know, hey, he gave me the idea for this.
Well, and that's like you said, that's honorable. The second half, maybe the less sexy part of being an honest person. Because when you get to just say whatever you want, everybody's like, man, that guy's so honest. But the second half of that is, hey, and also this guy helped me. That's that same vein of honesty to bring somebody in and go, hey, this is a guy that made a big impact. And obviously you're going to be able to visit and talk, and it comes easy to you.
But it goes both ways. I mean, he's consulted me on a lot of different things. If I have business questions or tax questions or horse questions,
sure,
I can call that guy anytime, and he's going to give me help.
Yeah.
And that's important to have mentors.
As a podcaster, I think it's the responsibility, and I've told people this when they come in doing ours, that the burden I feel like is on me. I feel like the burden is on me to make sure the conversation goes well. Like if there was a podcast, and knock on wood, there hasn't been one yet. So far it's gone really well. There are some that are just like super, super easy. Like there are podcasts I've listened to from other people that are 3 hours long and it doesn't feel like it at all. You know, it feels like it just goes easy. And then there's others, it feels like, you know, you're kind of having to navigate. As a podcaster, is there people that you don't want to talk to? Because
yes.
I used to say I could talk to anybody, and I don't think that's true anymore. I think there are specific types of people that I would really struggle to sit down and visit with.
Yes, so that's a tough. You have to be really honest about that, and you can hurt someone's feelings by doing that. But yeah, there's a lot of people who.
What kind of people
have not been on this show that some people might think should be on this show, but the reason that they aren't is one, either they won't be fully authentic yet. They're not ready to be fully authentic yet.
Yeah, that's good.
Because you don't come on this show and be fit. Like, it's just not this is not how we do it.
It's too long. Like, it's too long. You can't hold it. It's like holding your breath. You can't hold it for an hour, right? Like, you can't pretend or hold that.
Not in this format, you can't. You can do that in small interviews and in short form conversation, but not long form conversation. Not if you want to create something good that people want to hear about.
You know this. I'm probably repeating something you've already heard, but I heard Jordan Peterson and John Vervaeke, and I'll reference them again here in a minute. Mm-hmm. Have you listened to any John Vervaeke stuff?
Yes.
Oh, I'm obsessed with that guy right now. By the way, a professed Buddhist. That guy is one of the most fascinating people I've ever heard. But they were talking about the progression that children go through with mimicking, like a little kid that watches a movie and then tries to mimic a character that he feels connected to. And that as people, then from mimicking, you know, at a younger age, you travel into like a season or a period of persona. And persona is almost like your imagined self. It's like this version of yourself that you wish was true, and you're always projecting and trying to put out there that, you know, almost like an image everybody knows this. I think it's familiar to us because we've all been there.
Right.
You know, like I'm not good with pretense. I don't want to do pretense. I probably aspire to authenticity, maybe to a fault, but people get stuck in persona. And I think that would be a hard one to visit with somebody, because you're not talking to them. You're talking to their perceived imagined image that they're trying to put out into the world. And you're trying to guess who they're pretending to be. And listen, we've all been there. If anybody in this world has ever been a freshman in high school, you'll understand the concept of personas. Like, you're trying to act like you belong in high school, and like, you know where the classes are. And if you get lost, you don't want to admit you're lost. You like pretend you went there on purpose and stuff. That's what I'm talking about. And I think if I hear what you're saying, like, that would be really challenging, because you don't feel like you're talking to the person. You're almost talking to their
but it's also not valuable, at least not in this context, right? A good example would be the Dale Brisby podcast that we did. So
was that okay? Was that hard? Because here's a guy doing which speaks. You say no, that speaks to that guy's brilliance, because here's a guy that is literally telling you up front, like, here is this character, but then you know, I listened to that one, and you kind of feel like you're getting a sense of him as a person. So that
was a great example of a guest that I never reached out to, never asked to come on the podcast, and mostly from ignorance, didn't know him, never had spent any time with him, maybe bumped shoulders once or twice ever, never said hello, don't know him at all.
Right.
Know similar people, and he's just such a gracious guy. I said, hey, would you come on? He's like, absolutely, I'll be there tomorrow. Sweet. And what that podcast is you got to see a glimpse into who he is as a person, right, not his social media
persona. And it explains
persona.
The character. It explains the character because you know who he is. Yeah.
So you get an element of realism out of that you just might not get out of other people. But again, it speaks to that guy's character. And there's a lot of people. Joe Beaver's a good example. Came on here, laid it all out. But there's people in the rodeo world who maybe just aren't quite comfortable doing that. Yeah. And in the broad world together.
Fair enough, because if you're not settled in that, and I'm going to be 40 this month or next month, and I still, if I'm being honest, I still feel like I catch moments of that in myself, and I hate it so much. Like, I catch myself in moments where I'm kind of like shying away from maybe what's true, and even though I don't like it, I still catch myself doing it. So, and I mean, I've been in a professional career where like I'm speaking publicly, like I don't get the chance to really hide in that regard, and so when someone's in that, I think as a kid, you just call him a fake, you call him a hypocrite, like, oh, that's not true, that's not real, that guy's faking it, or he's not genuine, or whatever. We smell it. Maybe you don't see it, but it's like you smell it, right? So the older I get, the more I think maybe I feel more sympathy towards like, ugh, I remember that. I remember that feeling of always feeling like a phony, or that you're going to be discovered.
Yeah, imposter syndrome or whatever it is. But you also have to think about it from a standpoint of, and I always think about this with politicians left or right, because people are so critical of them, and I am too. I mean, I think it's just disgusting what's going on and how that's been weaponized and used to target every type of person. But at the same time, what you can do is you can take a glimpse at human nature through that, and then you can also go from that very top pinnacle, quote unquote, pinnacle person, which would be somebody in the limelight or social media fame or political fame, which was political fame. It's just
fame. Hey, let me say
what it is.
Political fame is a lot like pastoring fame. Yes. It is not. They're not congruent. They do not go well together.
They don't,
not,
and we've seen that. But what you have to recognize is when somebody's livelihood hinges on something, right? Yeah. Because most of these politicians are borderline worthless in any other profession. And actually, they're worthless in that one. Yeah. But so if you take that away from them, they really have nothing.
That's not true. Nothing. I mean, Nancy Pelosi is like a really, really talented investor. Turns out,
true, very talented.
She could be like living in the private sector, making millions of dollars. Instead, she chooses to serve as a politician.
It's true. Brilliant lady.
I'm kidding. I really didn't mean to take it to the political field.
No, not at all. But it's kind of necessary nowadays. But
that's such a part
what you have to do though is you don't have to tolerate it, but you just if you're intelligent enough to look at it and understand like the human nature behind those acts, then at least you know how to combat it or internalize it, because human beings have always been these ruthless, selfish, dogmatic, kind of vicious creatures, right? Yeah. Throughout all of history. You can look at that. Nothing's changed. The human brain hasn't advanced like the phone has. Right. It hasn't at all. And what you've got is people who are really just trying to survive. And maybe what people don't realize when they're being so offended and aggressive, left or right, it doesn't really matter, is the human nature hasn't changed.
Yeah.
But the small folk, as you would call them, they're the ones that have always been soft and easy and malleable, but the people at the top have never been that. And this is a real weird kind of segue, but to break that, because that's going down the wrong rabbit hole here. What happens is most people are just afraid to lose what they have if they are authentic. The biggest freedom that anybody can have, and very few have it, is where your livelihood isn't affected by you being authentic. Right. And that's really tough.
So one of the things that and this has probably been in the last year, one of the things that I have grown very distrusting of, and I think it doesn't matter what line of work you're in, what age, what gender, what culture, it doesn't matter what it is. One of the things I've become very distrusting of in my own life that I've started trying to learn to identify is the danger of preferences, because I think we're taught that preferences are the utmost. If I prefer it, then I want it, and in our culture that we deserve it, right? And the danger with that is exactly what you said. We're so afraid to lose. There's a story, and this is such a common thing, so I'm not referencing new information, but there's that story of the way they catch monkeys in the jungle with a box and the fruit inside. Have you heard this? Mm-hmm. Where it's got the hole in it, and the monkey can fit its hand inside the box, and it can grab a hold of like a papaya or whatever. And once they've got a hold of it, it's too big for them to pull their hand back out. And so in essence, they become trapped. Mm-hmm. And so, and I might even talk about this last time I was on, but by allowing that monkey to grab its preference, it has ensnared it to something that's going to enslave it. Does this make sense?
Oh, absolutely.
And so when you start looking at people that what they're afraid to lose, the thing their greatest fear, whatever it is that their greatest fear is almost always tied to their preference. They've accomplished some level of comfort that they like, and now instead of appreciating it and loving it, now they're afraid they're going to lose it, and it changes the DNA of their processes. It changes the way that they think about stuff. And I mean, I've been guilty of it too, pastoring.
It's human nature, yeah.
For sure. We don't realize that enslaving someone, from a biblical sense, enslaving somebody isn't necessarily a snare from the outside that captures them. It's about the way that we hold on to things, how tightly we hold on to things. Because what's the difference between me wearing a handcuff or me holding on to something that I won't let go? Functionally, it's the same, except one I think I chose. There's one that I think that I've got a hold of and I'm choosing it. So it doesn't feel like slavery. I feel free. So I can feel free on the inside, but yet on the outside, I'm just as caught as if I hadn't chosen it. And so when you look at preferences, and this goes back to the John Vervaeke thing, one of the things that is so clear in my mind is the need to understand the story. We've got to, as people, we've got to understand what the story is, because without it, we don't know how to prioritize anything. One of the things that, and I'm not, listen, to be very clear, I'm not smart. I'm annoyingly curious, but I'm not smart. So I'm like a good repeater. Like you remember the little kid toys, like you push the button and then it says it back to you. That's all this is. So this is not my information, but that AI, for a long time, we were so afraid of AI because we thought it was going to take over the world. And they're like, okay, but it can't solve complex problems. You know, it's a computer. It can't solve complex problems. Then all of a sudden it does. Now we're afraid of it again. We go, wait a minute, AI is going to take over the world. We're going to have functioning robots and things like that. And what they found right now, the hurdle right now, whether AI ever becomes something or not, who knows? Who knows? But a computer will look at a room and take in every single thing that doesn't have, it's like people with OCD, like actual OCD. Everybody claims they have it, but like actual OCD, it means that I will obsessively and compulsively focus on something that is unnecessary to the story. So you and I are sitting here talking and we know that's the story. We know that's what we're doing here. Now the auxiliary functions of this, we've got Ty checking the camera, and we've got this table, we've got things that are present in the room, but because you and I understand the story accurately, we know what to ignore. Our brains naturally know what to ignore. The screw that's holding this table together, super important, but I haven't thought about it. My brain knows to ignore it because it's not part of the story. So instantly it's a filing system that allows me to go, this is important, this is unimportant, right? So when you understand the story, it allows for that. And a computer doesn't have the ability to comprehend story. That to me, my opinion, my understanding of it is that's the thing that separates consciousness from computer animation, is that consciousness is able to comprehend a story. As people, we're able to comprehend a story. Marty Solomon with the Bema podcast is BEMA. If you ever want to know what the Bible is saying from a Middle Eastern perspective, that podcast is amazing. And he starts talking about story. So now, like in my mind, I'm going like, hey, this is a Buddhist, and this is he's a Christian, but he studies the Middle East from the Torah, and the connection, what they're both saying is we have lost our connection to the story. And when we lose the connection to the story, we don't know what we're doing in this room. We don't know that the conversation between you and I is important. We don't know how meaningful that is going to be. We lose that. So now something that's important has been shoved to the corner of unimportant. And maybe we start focusing on the screw that's holding the table together, and we lose out on the overall experience. And so that, I feel like I kind of went on a tangent here, but to understand what the story is, whether it's politics, whether it's the church, whether it's a personal story, like when I listen to what you're doing, my interest is, what is the story? And this is new. I'm learning to do this because if I know what the story is, I know what to ignore and I know what to focus in on. It's like I get the richness that's available if I understand the story.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so to kind of close what the original, well, there was two things
going back.
So there was two completely unfinished sentences really that led us into some really cool shit. What the Gauge podcast is now and is going to be is it is going to be Western people, rural background people having a foothold in intellectual conversation for the mainstream world.
Yeah.
So what we have is we have representation from all different cultures out there mainstream, right? We do. Well, you don't have people from our backgrounds who are considered to have intellectual weight,
right,
and to be a part of the narrative and to do something, right? You just don't, right? Because we're so stuck in our ways, right? Like if you rodeo for a living, you ain't thinking about nothing but rodeo. You might dabble in other things, but I mean, if you try to have conversations about like what's going on mainstream or things like you're saying with not everybody, because there's some truly brilliant people and anybody who's able to conquer their individual thing at the level that these people they're intelligent people.
There's always some intelligence that's sneaky in those regards.
There is, but I just have you just don't see a lot of people who are willing to serve in that way from our background because they just want to do their thing.
Yeah.
But the problem is, what you don't realize is our thing is this. Everything that's going on is so much bigger, and the small things, when a hurricane comes through, are the first to go.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's the strong, built down, brick by brick pillars that stay.
Right.
And I want to make sure that we're here with our spackling and our bricks, and we're laying that foundation too, because there's so many people in here who could actually, like, in our culture, who can make a difference, who need to be a part of the mainstream narrative. You have all these people. You've got people in the combat sports. You've got intellectuals like Jordan Peterson. You've got entrepreneurs that are out of control. You even have this crazy dude Andrew Tate who just got banned from everything. Whatever your opinion is of that guy, but this guy who comes out of not really nowhere, he's been around for a while and made appearances, but who is able to captivate the entire freaking world.
Good, bad, shut him down quick.
They did, but so that's not the point though. Like, we're not here to talk about what you think about the things that Andrew Tate says. Who cares? That's not the point. The point is he was able to come from his specific background and captivate.
Okay, now I'm curious what you think about Andrew Tate, though, because you said you're not here to talk about that. Now, instantly, it tweaks my
part of the problem with that guy, and I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, because anybody who is on social media has seen him.
Right.
He might say over the course of like say some pretty outlandish things, but anybody who gets canceled and has sound bites cut from conversations from years and years ago, all the context is removed.
Yeah.
Like my mother is a prime example. She's gonna be pissed, but like she's literally, because I was trying to explain something to her, and she's like, "You sound like that Andrew Tate guy." I was like, "What are you talking about?" She's like, "He's such a fucking idiot."
Mom.
And I was like, "Mom, first of all, you don't know who he is. Neither do I.
Right. No one does.
You're only making that judgment based on that 12-second clip you saw on TikTok, because you're flipping through TikTok all the time." Somebody cut that for their own benefit out of a long form conversation without the context. And is he misogynistic? Maybe. I don't really care about Andrew Tate. It's not the point. The point is context is all that matters, and that's the one thing that gets removed to cancel people.
I heard this is the reason I ask, is because I think he's polarizing, and I've since heard stuff and I'm like, ugh. But I didn't know who he was. You know,
I didn't either until maybe a month ago.
I've got a 13-year-old son, so obviously he's gonna know, you know, all the social media stuff. Mm-hmm. And he sent me a clip, and it's him he's holding like a sword, like this about this long, and he just said, like, no one's gonna tell you to be a vegan if you're holding a sword. Shut up, I'm gonna do what I want because I'm holding a sword. That was the part I'm like, that's funny. Whether, again, to your point, that's a funny.
That is funny.
So
and there's nothing inherently wrong with jokes. We're told now in society that you are not allowed to joke. You either follow this path, or you are wrong. It doesn't matter.
We've lost the story. We've lost the story because if you understand the story is to move things ahead, then jokes get to circulate as thought provokers, right? Like I hear a joke, and I know that I've heard things from people. So Dostoevsky, one of the old philosophers way back in the day, he would say things that he didn't believe or agree with. And the reason he would say them specifically was to initiate thought patterns. Because if I were to stand up here and defend something that I think is egregious, it's going to create a defense against it in someone, and then you get to have a conversation. And this take this for what it is. He got so fed up with the behaviors of the church, and Dostoevsky was a believer. Mm-hmm. He got so fed up with the behaviors of the church that he would sit outside the chapel and he would drink wine and smoke cigarettes and scream obscenities as people walked in. Now, you would look at that and you would go, absolutely not. I know people personally. There's people close to me that would be so deeply offended by that. But I see that as it's a thought-provoking exercise to try to bring the conversation back to why were those rules put in place in the beginning. We've lost the story. And because we've lost the story, take the church at large, because we've lost the story, we've now started to like zero in on things like the screw that holds the table together, even though it's an important part, because if the table's fallen down, it changes the nature of our conversation. We know that it's important, but it's not the focus, right? So when Dostoevsky starts doing his thing, what he's saying is, hey, we've started to focus on what was designed to be an auxiliary function. Like it's designed to be like present in the fringes, and we've made it the mainstream. So when I look at comedy or jokes or something, I don't know very many people. I'm sure there's like an autistic spectrum that won't allow for the function of humor. I'm not saying that doesn't exist. I'm saying your average person walking down the street, when someone says something intended to be funny, we know they're saying it to be funny. We know they're saying it.
But only if you're there for the context. Like contextualization is everything. Yeah. So you can take, we'll say Eddie Murphy, your favorite comedian, and if the whole scene, the whole story is built, and he's saying a your mama joke that's terribly offensive, whatever. Yeah. Eddie Murphy used to have some of the craziest, best jokes ever, right? Like from a comedic standpoint, when he was at his prime, might have been the best guy ever doing it. But if you've got a stadium full of people, and you see him on the stage with the microphone, and he says something completely and totally outlandish, the story's been set, the stage has been set, the context is all there for him to be funny. If you take a tool and you edit that out, remove the background, right? Remove the microphone. It's just this guy saying something horrifying and outlandish without the context. You get what happened kind of to Andrew Tate.
Okay, right? Let me ask you something because I hear what you're saying, and I really don't know the answer, so this is not a leading question.
Andrew Tate might not be a great role model. Like I'm not saying he is. I haven't consumed enough of his stuff to know that.
Honestly, same.
What I do think is him being canceled is not correct. It would be just like
That's a
cancel.
scary precedent.
Yeah,
But he's getting banned and not for jokes or anything, but for his behavior and his behavior towards women especially. And also he's been
but it's all because I actually researched it because I had a feeling that somebody might try to bring this up if the conversation came up. But it's actually missing the context. So this might be the only thing I consume because I was really curious what his response would be.
Yeah.
And so I watched his little memoir thing that he put out explaining it. And it was like, and he laid out some of the context. It's like, okay, if you're getting your information from 12-second to 1-minute sound bites from things where this guy was talking for 3 hours to somebody, then you are kind of part of the problem, right? You have to have context. And I'm going to drop the Andrew Tate thing right there because it has no bearing.
I feel a little weird about it too because I really don't know that much. So
I don't know enough about him personally.
Yeah.
I've seen things that he says that are completely and totally unobjectively true, and then I've seen some things that are just silly.
Yeah, just
but you could say that about anybody.
Yeah.
So it's not my job to judge some multimillionaire who lives in Romania and has a Bugatti.
Jake and Logan Paul made a career out of saying things that were just incredibly offensive, or so I mean that's part of what we celebrate.
So many people do.
Yeah.
So many people do, and that's you don't have to agree with somebody to, and this is a dangerous thing, right? When you get into a position where context doesn't matter, where if they disagree with you, just for the plain fact that they disagree with you, they deserve to be canceled, and you support you support that dog whistle, then that is a terrifying thing because that means it can happen to you. It doesn't matter how much to one side you think you are and how important you think your beliefs are and how much they align with kind of the current trend.
Yeah.
At some point, you will be turned on, you will be flipped on, and the same thing can happen to you.
Well, okay, so the story has become social murder.
Yes.
That's the story. And that's a story that seems scary to me. I've seen other histories where social murder became acceptable. And then, I mean, we're talking all sorts of slippery slopes. That's the reason that I'm like, I just don't know on the canceling thing in general, because social murder, meaning you can't participate anymore in the public square at all. You're gone. That to me, that's how you radicalize people. That pushes
people are already radicalized. And here's the thing. When you radicalize one side, right now we're living in this whole the current thing is wokeism. That's the current thing. And we're cowboys and we're this, and we think we're immune to that. No, you're not. No, we're not. Like there's stuff, and I don't know if anybody's watched that Western Justice guy. I've let him come on this show 2 times because his message is really important.
What's his name?
His name's David Duquette, but it's called Western Justice, and they're a lobbyist group who's trying to ensure that the Western way of life stays, intact, and specifically Western sports and horse racing and all that stuff. But long story short, what people in our culture don't realize is by not partaking and by not being vocal about some of these things, we're 1%.
Yeah.
And not the good 1%. This is just one of those things that when the wind blows, it'll just go away, and there'll be a fixation on other things.
Yeah.
But right now the focus is wokeism. That's the thing. That's the virtuous thing, right? Virtuous thing is to be that. But what a lot of that is, so there's 2 things, right? There is blissful ignorance, which is you are completely ignorant, meaning
happiest people on earth.
You are that you don't know.
Earth.
Well,
yeah.
Certainly not happy, but yeah, maybe I need to remove the word blissful. But there's ignorance, and then there's willful ignorance, and that's what a lot of we'll call them right-wingy, center left people are, right? So there's a lot of people who are my age and slightly younger who know nothing about Marxism whatsoever. They really don't.
Right.
Because there's been some polls taken, and a good 30% of people think that socialism/communism should be tried in this country.
Ugh,
there's another 30%. There's another 30% of society based on these polls. Now I understand that they could take these in different places and it would skew it left or right, or up or down, but who think maybe it could work. They don't know the framework. They don't know where this idea started, how it started, and how many people it's killed. I mean, it doesn't.
What's the line that if you are a Republican before 20, you don't have a heart, and if you're a Democrat after 20, you don't have a brain? Have you ever heard that line? I'm probably messing that up. But who wouldn't want, reasonably, if you didn't do any research and at a glance, who wouldn't want to live in this utopia where everybody gets everything for free? I don't want to be too harsh. If somebody were to go, this could work, I get that somebody would go, that sounds amazing.
Especially from the age of 14 to 25.
Yeah.
You truly are. That your brain is developing, and you're right. Like it sounds amazing, but
it's so
you
hard.
have to go all the way back to the founding of these ideas. You have to go all the way back to the Bolshevik revolutions and look at what's happened, and then follow the bouncing ball throughout history. I mean, you want to look at a prime example. You look at Venezuela, right? You look at Venezuela and how quickly. I mean, you're talking third richest society per capita based on population in the world. And what happens is there's becomes a young group. You know, the upcoming generation gets disenfranchised with how the money is made and what they consider to be unjust and unfair. So what do? They vote in socialist regime.
I'm gonna either sound kind of smart or super stupid, but didn't they send Che Guevara to Venezuela? Wasn't he from Cuba? Didn't they send him to get away from Castro because he was too?
Yeah, but that's way before what's happened here. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean but that's another thing. I mean, you have these quote unquote woke people walking around with Che Guevara t-shirts on. They don't actually know what they're wearing. So that's, again, it's ignorance.
Yeah.
You are wearing something that represents someone who had an ideology that we kill our opposition. Right? Anybody who doesn't believe what we believe, we get rid of. But that's just ignorance because nobody taught you different. They don't teach it in school. Yeah. Right? And then what you have is people teaching based on theory without experience who only learned that one thing that was taught. And it's really problematic because but it happens with really, really far right-minded people too. They will not consent that there's a version of liberalism that works. And actually the saving grace, I think, for where we're at right now, if there is one, is not far-right ideology, is not Trumpism, if you want to call it that. It's actually true liberalism, not leftism, but liberalism.
I'm going to risk my reputation by saying this, but you know what the 1017 Project is? Mm-hmm. So last year, we donated 150,000 pounds of hamburger.
Right.
It has gone nuclear. We've got partnerships all over the place now. Like the food banks are growing. Shout out 1017. What we're looking at right now is strategic partnerships, which means like a company that says we see what the cattle project's doing. When you put protein in a food bank, you add life to everything else on the shelf. Mm-hmm. You take noodles and vegetables and all that, and you give it value with a pound of hamburger. And a pound of hamburger is 4 meals. And we've got to a place where for every dollar that comes in, we can put a pound of hamburger into a food bank. 50,000 pounds of it in North Texas. I say all that to say this. As well as the 1017 Project is going, this is where I risk my reputation, and I'm saying this in Texas, and I have Republican family. The after school programs and the children of disenfranchised parents, when you're food insecure is classified as anybody who chooses a meal or a bill, right? You're going to either pay a bill or buy food. The way the children are taken care of in blue states is actually more efficient in my experience only. This is my scope. I can't speak to everybody else's experience. But when we talk to food banks and after school programs and women's shelters, women that have left abusive relationships and need a place to go, these types of things, their programs are way more efficient than in the red states. The budgets are higher. The care is higher. And I only say that to say this idea that one side is 100% right and the other side is 100% wrong is maybe that's the blissful ignorance you're talking about, because in my experience, there are some things that the left is doing really efficiently as far as care. Now, if somebody, and we hear people like, well, all you're doing is just feeding people that aren't willing to work. Yes. To be clear, yes, that does happen, but their kids didn't choose them as parents. Those kids that come home that don't have anything to eat, there are school programs. We learned this during COVID. During COVID, well, first stat that's sad is that child abuse cases went down 70%. And they're like, oh, that sounds great. Well, where do the child abuse cases get discovered? By teachers at school, and they're not going to school. So you can guess the kind of scenarios these kids are living in when school is out.
Oh, those statistics are already out. Actually, it flip-flopped. Like the abuse actually went up once they went through the actual data. But yeah, you're correct. And that's why I am not a proponent. I am not a proponent of leftism, and I am not a proponent of rightism. Yeah. I don't even think they even use the phrase rightism.
Rightism. Yeah. Did you just coin a phrase?
Who knows? I've not heard it. I'm sure someone has.
It's going to be like rightism - Chance Conrado.
Yeah, but the problem isn't whether it's leftist ideology or rightist ideology. It's that you do not have a central mindset. It means you do not see value in what the viewpoints of somebody else. Which means we can't have discourse. Discourse is not allowed, and we think. Just because I'm closer to the right than the left, we think it's not allowed for us. Like, and there is an element of that. Like this woke ideology, they are asking for things that they are unwilling to give.
So
constantly. Actually, no, demanding things.
Demanding is
you
right.
must tolerate my views. You must tolerate my pronouns. You must tolerate this, but I will not tolerate yours because it does not align.
Well, so
but you get that on the right too.
That's
So
exactly
it's the
my
same
point.
thing.
That's exactly what we're saying. That's why preference is so scary. That says I prefer this, and I want to eliminate any threat to my preference. And we worship in this country. We worship preference. We worship preference.
That is
highest.
the new God. That is the religion, and that comes into a whole nother thing because we have yet to talk about you leaving your career as a pastor.
Oh, it all goes in together. When you talk about preference, what you're saying is comfort, and what you're saying is I'm a part of a story and I want to write it. I want to be the one who writes it. I do not want to participate in somebody else telling my story about my morals, my sexual preferences, what I do with my money, what I do with my time, what I do with. We don't want to believe that we can surrender that effectively. We want to have a hand on the pen, right, in the story, right? And that's what preference allows, and that's why, you look at so many times in the Bible where God was like, you can't do both, and we preach that as a rule. We preach that as a behavior. But the meaning behind it was either I get to write your story as the creator, my personal belief, as the creator is writing your story, he's going to utilize pieces that you don't even understand yet. There's an excitement, there's an adventure, there's like Abraham leaving his family and going to a place he'd never been, just trusting that God's telling a story, and look at the life that guy got to live in the Old Testament versus someone like Judas. And we say Judas and it's always boo, hiss. To Judas's credit, to his credit, it's probable that Judas thought Jesus wasn't doing it right. I mean, think of the distinction here. You got Abraham who's like, okay, I'll trust it. Like his ability to forgive.
I'll trust it to the point where, based on what you're telling me, I have so much faith in what you're telling me that I will kill Isaac.
Yeah. Versus, I will trust you so far as my preferences don't get threatened, which means my preferences are actually my ultimate guiding light. And so when you look at Abraham, that guy's willingness to forgive, he takes over an entire country and becomes wealthy. And the guy goes, can I just take my family back? And Abraham says, take all of it back, because I don't want you to say that you're the reason that I'm wealthy. And Marty Solomon, that's a Marty Solomon quote, that forgiveness is the ultimate act of trusting the story. You're saying whether this was right or wrong, I'm going to let that go because my belief is that I'm a part of telling a story. And I would be focusing on an unimportant detail, like a screw in the table. Yes, it's there, but it's not the story. It's not the main thing. And that when you operate in a level of forgiveness, what you're saying is there's this belief that there's a bigger story being told. Whereas Judas said, Jesus, you're not doing it right. We're trying to take over the Romans and I don't feel like you're doing it right. And so by selling Jesus, think about this. If he thought that Jesus was who he said he was, and he surrenders him over for 30 pieces of silver, you could make the argument that he was like, well, if he's Jesus, we're going to find out, because he would never let him take him if he really had the power to keep him.
And also his opinion of the greater good in his mind at that time might have been higher than his trust in Jesus Christ.
Well, and so that's why preferences are not something to be worshipped. At a functional level, it is a scary thing, because what you're saying is I know ultimately what is best, and that anybody throughout history would say, careful with that. If my child said at 10 years old, I got a 10-year-old daughter who is a 10-year-old, 17-year-old, if she said, I'm going to drive to school today, I'm actually saying yes to her living longer by telling her no. No, you're not going to drive to school today. Why? I'm saying no to driving, but what I'm saying yes to is longer life. And someday, if you trust me long enough in this story that I'm your dad and I have your best interest in mind, then if you trust me long enough, eventually you will look back and know that I was right, even against your preference at 10 years old. Now, that's a finite difference between me and my daughter. My daughter's intelligence and my intelligence, that's a measurable difference. If God says...
It's also based on life experience, right? So
sure.
Experience is one of the biggest metrics of intelligence, right? And how you utilize it. And that's a prime example, right, in that story.
Exactly. So how arrogant do I have to be as a person to go, God, I know that's what you have said, but for me... Speaking of my daughter, she came out, she wanted to rope the other day. My kids don't care about roping at all. It's been recently a little bit.
Mine are young, but they could not give two shits which side of the horse takes the shit.
Yeah, my son, it's like, hey, you want to go rope? And he will literally be like, yeah, Dad, let's go rope from dang cow. I'm like, that's not how I talk. Shut up. But my daughter the other day, she wants to rope the dummy. She had some friends or whatever. And so she comes out there and she's like, let me show you how I do it. And she's 10 and I love her and we are super, super close. I love her more than my own life by a lot. But in that moment, I said, Cody, that's literally the stupidest thing you've ever said. And she kind of is this like offended, like, what do you mean? I go, why would I care how you like to do it? Nobody wants to suck at anything. So if you want to like see progress, to your point, why don't you take somebody who has done something and kind of like ask and like set down your preference and pursue truth. Because in the truth, what you're going to find is there's a way to do things that go beyond your understanding. And I think so for me, that's the scary part about preference, is it says that if I prefer it, truth comes second. And I think that's a precedence that's a really scary, slippery slope.
Yeah, but that is the number one religious belief. Like the number one religion, people will say that Islam's the number one religion growing, and I've been studying Islam a lot. Like,
dude, it's fascinating.
Like a lot. And I find it to be probably the second most fascinating religion. But and there's things I respect about it, and we can get in that in a minute. But the number one religion in the world is the religion of self. Everybody, and I've spent most of my life doing it. You likely have too. Everybody in this room and every room anywhere congregating in this, specifically this country, is doing it. All you have to do is go to Instagram and you realize the number one religion in this world is the religion of self. Right. Self-worship. Everybody is a slave to their ego and to their self. And everything you're saying, preference is self. Yeah. That's what that is. Preference is self. And as soon as you're worshiping your preferences, following your preferences, and worshiping yourself, everything else that's good in your life is going to take a back burner. In fact, that's how depression creeps in for a lot of people. Now, loss can cause depression and things of that, but it's because you are serving yourself, and every single thing that you do is based around this idea that my God is myself.
It seems like every study that I've looked at as far as depression is concerned says they use the word I at a rate that's unhealthy. They talk about I, and Jordan, would be very depressed if my story was the ultimate good in this universe. If I was as good as it gets, I see where I lack, I see what I'm missing, I see where I don't measure up, I see who I'd like to be and who I am. How could you not be depressed if I thought the ultimate good in this world was on my shoulders? I take tremendous joy in knowing that I get to be the screw in the table. I'm not the story. I get to be a functioning part. I was at the airport yesterday, and it's a fascinating thing that we do as people, the way that we can categorize, the way that we can take mass amounts of information and push things to the edges and ignore it and focus on what we're doing. But I don't know, tens of thousands of people were in the airport yesterday, and what's so interesting to me is every single one of them has a mom and a dad and a story and trauma and excitement and dreams and goals. And I mean, every single person there has the same amount of story that I have. And I wonder if in the same way that we categorize people as they're in my way, I'm going to my gate, because my gate is the most important thing in the moment. I wonder if people haven't started to allow themselves, the worship of self leads to, it's kind of like the saying, like, everything is nothing. Like, if you have everything, you have nothing. There's got to be some yin and yang and some distinction, right? That if I'm the ultimate, then ultimately I'm of no value. I'm of zero value. If I'm as important as it gets, then the world has no meaning, because I see that my life is meaningless without something bigger to achieve or strive to.
So you just said something that's really, really important. And whether or not you realize you said it or not, it actually ties into exactly what's going on in our world right now, which is, this is the biggest question people have, because it's right in our face what's going on. And this is going to be the last political tangent I go on. But this is when I talk to people about what's going on in the world, because I mean, I don't have time to rope. I don't have time to do anything other than this, build my business, and then the rest of it is time researching what the hell's going on in the world and trying to add, value to the microphone by knowing things. People ask, "Oh, yeah, why would they do that? Why would they want to institute these things and remove freedoms and do these things?" It's because of what you just said. They see themselves as the ultimate pinnacle of human society. They're not necessarily wrong from a monetary standpoint either. But there is no value to anything that you and I monetarily would value. Yeah. A Ferrari doesn't matter. A ranch doesn't matter. Every trip, every meal, every sexual partner or whatever doesn't matter, because you can have that at the snap of your fingers. There's nothing. Life means nothing. So what matters? Instituting what you think is the greater good. That's what Lenin did. That's what Stalin did. That's what Mao did. That's what Adolf Hitler did. Yeah. You're going to try and tell me that there isn't a group of people who do not think that same thing right now and do not want to usher in what they think the greater good is. They actually think...
Nietzsche said, "Verily I laugh at those who think themselves safe because they have no teeth." And I understand that to mean everybody thinks, well, I wouldn't be that way, because they don't have the opportunity. If somebody had the opportunity to wipe swaths of people off the planet, we would all like to sit here and say we wouldn't do it. But what you see is when you give somebody that absolute power. Okay, so it's like a peak, it's like a mountaintop,
the phrase is absolute power corrupts absolutely.
So you're going up a mountain, right? And you can see the top of the mountain, and then you get there. And what happens? You crest and you start going back down. You don't get to operate. When the Bible talks about love in a way that is so much more than we understand it. It is so much more than what we grasp at a glance. But what it's saying is you don't get to love anything if yourself is at the center of it, because you're either trying to get it or you're afraid you're going to lose it. It crests and it goes over. And now all of a sudden you're like, I want that. Okay, I got it. How do I keep from losing it? If I were to have the ability, if I had the ability to write you a check right now for $800 billion and you're on paper, except for the Saudis, the most wealthy man on the planet, instantly what we do as people is we realize it fast forward us straight to death. We instantly fast forward straight to our own death and we go, I can't hold on to it. So now what we have to do is we have to try to create structures for ourselves. We're trying to build the pyramids. We're trying to do things that say, how do I put off my death? So the same thing that we wanted to increase the quality of our life is now the thing that is instantly decreasing the quality of life because we're met with our own demise. There hasn't been one person that has solved the riddle of how to live forever. And so you look at Solomon, and the Bible talks about that Solomon, who, by the way, wasn't a great king. By the way, we make him a hero. That dude, they begged for mercy from Solomon. Anyway, and here to there. But you look at what he wrote in Ecclesiastes, and you have to be careful reading Ecclesiastes because it's not prescriptive. It's just him sort of vomiting out his life. And he is saying that I have it. Everything you say that you can have for influence, I've got it. I've got power. I've got wealth. I've got people. I've got influence. They say that the 4 stressors of life, there's 4 that create stress in anything that you do. And that is wealth, power, influence, or pleasure. If at any point you find yourself stressing out about something, it's probably coming from one of those 4 channels: power, influence, money, or pleasure. And so what he says is, I've had all 4 of them. I've got to the end of all 4 roads. And his takeaway was, find a job that you enjoy doing, find people that you love. That is the ultimate experience of life. And that is coming from somebody who got to the end and said, there's nothing here. It's all vanity, 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 vanity. And just the gut-wrenching desperation that there's nothing better around the corner. I think that's what drives a lot of people is, if I can get around the corner, just wait. You are not going to believe how awesome it's going to be. And Solomon made the entire corner. He comes back around and goes, I got bad news. There's nothing there. I'm not the ultimate. I have to have something bigger than that to strive towards. Now, take God out of the picture. Money is always something you can strive for, because no matter how much you have, you can always have more. So you can, theoretically, always have something larger than yourself to pursue. You said sexual partners, the Pareto distribution, where it's the 80-20, where 80% of all sexual encounters take place amongst 20 people, or the 20%. 80% of all points scored in all professional sports are scored by 20% of the players. 80% of all the music sold is sold by 20% of the artists. In this pattern, it's this Pareto distribution that follows life, right? So if you're one of those people that's outside of that 20%, you've always got something bigger than yourself that drives you forward. But the problem is not getting there. The scary part is that once you've got there and you realize it's no more fulfilling, it's actually worse, because now there's not something to push you forward. Now life has no hope, because the thing that you based your hope in is death. Even if you got it, now you're afraid you're going to lose it. There's never a moment where you can relax and sit in it. And so then you go back to the Bible, and it says, look at the lilies of the valley. And like, I've heard that verse my whole life. That's a wooden pew, hymnal, carpet, do this in remembrance of me table, all the things that we've experienced in church. I've heard lily of the valley. I know that it's a churchy term until you look at it in this perspective and you go, wait, it's a tip. It's a clue. It's God saying, like, if you will just live in what you have today, there's so
many ways to say it too. And a lot of people say it without the religious connotation. I mean, take a second to smell the roses is another version of that, but be where your feet are is another one, but you're 100% right. Guys, rock and roll denim has absolutely changed the game when it comes to the performance and style in Western jeans. Top competitors like Shad, Tim O'Connell, Shelly Morgan, you name it. Your boy right here, we're all wearing rock and roll denim. Inside and outside of the arena, it gives you the flexibility you need to win, as well as looking absolutely great in your interviews, appearances, whatever it is you're doing. Even when you're just doing podcasts like me. I had a chance to go to Rock and Roll Denim's factory the other day and pick out all the pants I wanted. Here's the thing. I got to try on a bunch of their new jeans. I love the men's Revolver jeans with the reflex stretch technology because they're comfy. They're not stiff like some of the other jeans. Go check them out at rockandrolldenim.com or follow Rock and Roll Denim on Facebook and Instagram for the newest trends in Western fashion. rockandrolldenim.com. And it kind of comes to the religious discussion, right? Because if you listen to this show long enough, you will have heard or been able to infer that I am a critic of the church.
Oh, I hope there's not a time constraint because
there's no time constraint.
Good.
Never actually. But I was raised in the church. I went to biblical schools. I did all of it. Got thrown out of them multiple times. Out of everyone I ever went to.
You have to be careful, Chance, because the kids that get thrown out of Bible school go on journeys that usually end in them being in some level of ministry. I just want to warn you. I just want to give you a heads up. You're in danger, but keep going.
So every way that a person could turn from the church, turn from God, I have done. Most of the things that I've listed off is things that I have pursued, right? And you know what? You know what I think, before I get into this, is one of the more pure things you can do, to be honest, based on depending on what your motivations are, but pursuing money is not the evil that people say that it is. The only people who say pursuing money is evil are people who don't have money. What I've recognized and why I didn't rodeo and decided to go on a pursue money path is because I realized that you cannot build a house without hammer and nails. Right. You can't do it.
Right.
In this modern world, you can't do much without financial stability. You can't, if your goal is to help people, you're not going to do it without money. You might be able to go out and hand out a couple loaves of bread in the street and pat yourself on the back and say you did wonderful things. But if you had financial stability, a good business that pays you, whatever it is, you have money, then if you're of the correct mindset and not a self-worshiper, you can do so much more if you have that tool.
Yeah.
So it's the carpenter buying his nails to build his house.
There's a story in the Bible about the rich young ruler, and it specifically doesn't give him a name. And scholars will tell you that is an important detail. He doesn't get a name. His name is Rich Young Influence. That's who he is. So he comes to Jesus and he goes, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" We've all heard this story. And Jesus says, A, B, C, and D. And he's like, "I do those things. That's awesome. I got it. I can do it." And he goes, "Oh, and give up the thing that makes you you." That's what the question. He said, "Give away everything you have to the poor." And like instantly, if I'm being honest, I hear that and I'm like, "Oh, could I do that?" Like anybody who will stand and go, "I can do that, no problem," probably hasn't ever been in that scenario or has never had anything to lose. Like if you're having to give up your cardboard box that you live in on the weekends, like if that's all you have in the world, and Jesus goes, "Give that up," you're like, deal. But if you have something to lose, but what he is saying, what Jesus is specifically saying is, you draw your identity from being rich, young, and in a position of power. Until you know who you are, think of this, until you know who you are, separate from those things, world champion, business owner, podcaster, whatever the case may be, whatever titles we put on ourselves, Jesus goes, "I can't save you if you don't exist." If you don't exist, there's no you to save. C.S. Lewis said this. He said, hell is just an eternal disintegration. And he describes it as a person who is grumbling in the beginning and maybe doesn't even like it about themselves. And they're just grumbling. They're kind of always complaining. And I don't like that. I should work on it. But over time, gradually what happens is that person begins to disintegrate. And all that's left is the grumbling until his explanation is until they've become fully the grumble. They are gone and they are fully become their mistakes, right? And so my caution for myself is, you're exactly right. I know so many wealthy people that are doing great for the kingdom, but I think at any point they could tell you who they are apart from that. And that's what, and it says that guy went away sad. He went away sad because he said, without rich, young, and powerful, there's nothing left of me, which tells me that the progression of the grumbler becoming the grumble had already taken root and it got more of a hold of them than something that was more important, if that makes sense.
Correct, and I agree with that, and that's a great proverb actually. But from my viewpoint, it could be wrong. It's all based on the foundation, because you can have the nails, you can have the hammer, you could have everything, but if the foundation of the house is wrong, the house is going to crumble.
Correct. Yeah.
So it's all based on that foundation, right? So.
Well, to be clear, I don't mean you specifically. I think for me, I'm saying for me specifically.
I'm actually not defending myself at all, because everything you said about that would have been me not 6 months ago.
Well, okay. This is an exercise. Jamie Winship, and you guys can go do your own research on Jamie Winship. He talks about identity, and I want to put you through an exercise real quick, if you'll allow me, because I think it's fascinating. I think anybody listening could do this exact same thing. And we'll go all the way through it, but just three things. If you had a piece of paper, again, Jamie Winship, if you want to go look this up, it's identity exchange. If you were to write down 3 lies that you believe about yourself, and you don't have to tell me what they are, it's not any of my business, but if you were to have a list, piece of paper and pen, if you were to write down 3 lies that you believe about yourself, do you understand the contradiction that I just said? Because you are consciously saying, A, I know it's a lie, but B, I also believe
Every good liar believes it's a lie, though. So
I will tell you that in mine, I struggle. I always feel like a failure. Now, I recognize that's not possible. It's not possible that God created me as a failure. I recognize that, but I still struggle with it. So your list, right? If you were to take that list, fold it up, you got your 3 things. Even listening, it's an exercise anybody could do. If you were to take that piece of paper, fold it up, and hand it to your understanding of Jesus, whether you're a believer, whether or not, if you were to take that piece of paper and you were to hand it to Jesus, in your opinion, what do you think he would do with it?
Oh, I know what he would do with it. He'd throw it out.
Stop right there. No one. This is intrinsic to humanity. This to me speaks about the presence of the Creator in every human being. Nobody says he would give it back to me to fix. There's something about the concept of Jesus that we know that Jesus is the solution. This is the story. This is cover to cover the Bible, that Jesus is that solution, that we can give him something that's wrong. He takes it and he addresses it and he handles it. So whether someone's like a devout churchgoer or whatever the case may be, there's something about the concept of Jesus that in every person, they go, I don't believe in Jesus. Okay, well, just think of your concept of who he might be. We hand it to him and he takes it and absorbs it. You hear people say he'll burn it, he ingests it, whatever the case may be. Nobody thinks that when they think of the concept of Jesus, that Jesus would take that and give it back to him. Does this make sense? So when I talk about like for me, like the rich young ruler and the things that we goof up on and things that we make mistakes on, I feel aware of them without feeling a responsibility to be the solution for those things. I can do at the same time. That's the story. I mean, if you want to know this, to me, the story of the Bible, cover to cover, Genesis all the way to Revelation, it's the story of an intersection. The whole Bible is a story of an intersection where mercy and justice connect, and those aren't supposed to ever connect. Mercy and justice are never supposed to touch. Full mercy would be the ignoring of justice, and full justice would be the ignoring of mercy. Somebody, R.C. Sproul says that if God were to wipe every human off the planet, the worst we could accuse him of is justice. Well, maybe it's not very merciful, but at least it's just, right? So the story of the Bible is the cross, where death, Jesus, the ultimate good, the ultimate source of good. And you go back to the Old Testament, the snake on the stick, where they would look at him and they would still get bit by the snakes, but now it wasn't fatal. There's so much in the Bible that just speaks to this. So Jesus willfully sets down the ultimate good. He places himself at the crux, at the intersection of mercy and justice, which isn't supposed to happen. And from that, he fully surrenders and comes back to life. The life in that, everything that we believe as far as Christianity grows out from that. I want to go back to something in the Old Testament. Jacob says that Jacob wrestled with God. This is such a frustrating story because you're like, what? If you were to tell somebody that Jacob wrestled with God and persevered, that story says that God gave him a new name. It was a new identity. That identity exchange said, these are the things I believe about myself that are a lie. The second half of that is God goes, okay, but here's what's actually true. Here's the name that I give you. And that's go to Jamie Winship. God takes Jacob the name deceiver, which was an identity, a lie that he believed about himself, that he carried with him everywhere. And he lived up to that expectation of himself. God takes that, Jesus takes that. And it doesn't say he wrestled with an angel. It says he wrestled with the person. It was a Christification, I think is the word, where Jesus appears in the Old Testament. But it says that he takes his name deceiver and he gives him the name Israel. Do you know what the name Israel means?
Tell me.
Wrestles with God. And
That's right. I actually did know that.
Now, go to the Muslim faith. Do you know what Muslim means?
No.
I love this so much.
Yeah.
Submitted to God. Now go back to your church experience. You've got wrestles with God. You've got submitted to God. I can take a guess because you ran from it. I can take a guess. Which one best describes your experience growing up? Wrestles with God and things that you don't understand, or submitted to God and pretend that you do even if you don't?
So every aspect of the way I grew up is
Same.
submitted.
Same.
Whether that be with my father and the way that he operated, or with the church. And a lot of it was maybe the way that it was presented to me. But yeah, absolutely. And so completely ran from the whole idea of Christianity, to the point where I would try to find things, and I would say this stupid, untrue thing that almost, I would say the majority of quote unquote Christ believers say, well, I believe in Jesus, but I don't believe in the church. I am spiritual, but I am not of the church.
I love Jesus. I'm just not wild about his bride.
Yeah, exactly. And so what I would do, and you could even see it on this show, I've done it, is find little nuances that I could latch onto to pick apart Christianity. And
now pause. If God said, my people will wrestle with me, is it interesting to you to think that in that moment that you thought was rebellion, you're actually closer to fulfilling the call of God's idea of your life, which is to wrestle back and forth? There's a saying that says, if you're going to wake up the king at 2 a.m. for a glass of water, you better be the prince, right? that's the kind of relationship that God says when we say wrestles with me, that's an intimate, personal, relational thing. Submitted to me is king versus citizen. And so when I hear people say I'm wrestling with something, like I don't know, I don't like this part, I don't like that part. What about this? And I want to get back to this, but what about the church? The church claims all these behaviors. Why are their behaviors so far over here? You go through this, anybody goes through this. The church says this and does this, right? In those moments where we're wrestling, that's actually a closer understanding of who God is because we haven't walked away. I see it in you a lot, that the wrestling indicates a pushing in, not a running out. Because if you're just running from God out, right, there's no wrestling in that. There's no wrestling. When you're like, well, why this? Why this? What you're doing, what we as people are doing in those moments is we're wrestling our way back in. So knowing wrestles with God was God's idea, submitted to God is a Muslim faith. I'm like, wait a minute. And I don't blame not one person. If my mom and dad listen to this, I don't blame my mom and dad. Maybe it was my collective understanding, but my understanding was far more in function Muslim than Christian. And so the freedom that comes with, hey, wrestling can be a part of it. You can get kicked out of Bible school or Christian school or whatever, and Jesus can get the giggles over that. Whether you believe that or not, he sees where you're going. He sees the battery acid necessary for where you're going to go in life, and it's not going to fit into a Christian school today. And so Chance is going to get kicked out. I know, just watch. It's just who he is. But wait till you see what he does later. See what I mean? It doesn't remove you from the call of God in your life. It actually embeds you further, because at some point God's going to say something in your life and you're like, I got it. I get it.
Yeah, no. And that's one of the reasons why having you as a guest on this show multiple times is something I'd like to do and was absolutely wanting to do, is because the way that you break down biblical text and biblical understanding, and I don't say this lightly because I consume so much biblical information. I mean, we have this great tool, YouTube. It's unbelievable. You don't need an education because you can get it yourself just by typing in. It's so unbelievable, the tools that we have. You can study everything you want to know about Islam, Catholicism, any Protestant religion, Buddhism, the oldest religion, there. Hinduism. It's all there. You can learn everything you want to learn. It's amazing. Like, it's almost divine what we have here. It's like a gift, because we can get so many different perspectives if we choose to. And I have yet to meet somebody who can break down something so nuanced like that in such a fine and pinpointed way to where a child could understand it. Like what you just did there, and you may not recognize it, or maybe that's why you became who you became, but is you just explained what's so amazing about the Christian faith and what is so amazing about the whole idea, the whole premise of Jesus Christ. Is, and the misconception we all have if we don't look into it, right? Anybody could have that misconception about Christianity because most of the people teaching Christianity are they just don't know. I think. And that analogy, I think, could live in time forever, as
it has.
It has. Yeah. It's just not been told correctly or not understood correctly. And I don't know. I hope 10 million people hear that little 4-minute, I'm going to say rant because I just can't think of a better term. I like it. And
rabbit hole.
It's not even a rabbit hole. It's the only hole.
Yeah. Well, so
it was just really amazing to hear that.
So you and I think I hate when people say I'm just like you, because instantly my knee jerk is like, no, you're not. But so I don't want to do that to you. But the wrestling part is very familiar to me, and everything that I've discovered that we just talked about didn't come from my like excitement about the church culture. Never. Like my dad wanted me to go to a Bible university, and I remember being very clear, like there is no chance. There's a better chance of me becoming pregnant than going to that Bible. Like, it's not happening. Never have I been drawn into the church culture. Never. And getting now to, I just quit my job as a pastor. I think if we're not careful.
Imagine, so you just went through all this, and then people are like, wait, he's not a pastor anymore.
Yeah, well, okay. So for me in my life, I've got a few people that are like security blankets, people that I just call that I just know me. And Justin McKee is one of them. I just love that guy. And he called me last night. He thought I was in Arizona. He knew I was here.
Justin is one of like the great gifts that our culture has.
You're not wrong. That guy is.
The amount of grace and kindness that he just gives everybody. I mean, he's one of the only people that I know that, even if you don't really, really know him, like I don't really, really know Justin, but I have all these texts where he's just like, I just want to let you know you're doing a good job.
Yeah.
I'm sure you do too.
Yeah.
I
love that guy, and I don't throw that word around lightly. I love Justin McKee, Justin and Jeannie, both. But he calls me last night. He goes, I just want you to know something, that God's not done with you, and that your life is going to be meaningful in circles and areas that we're not going to be able to be reached with what you are doing. And I feel really strongly about that. And I'm just like sitting there like, I try not to be an emotional guy, right? But every now and then Justin will call and just, it's so guided. It's so specific. You know, like when someone talks to you and things that you've been thinking about. And so maybe that's my hope, is I would love to think that there's going to be opportunities for these types of communications, that because I have a deep sympathy for people who have ran away from church that didn't mean to run away from Jesus. I feel a deep, maybe even responsibility to people in that position that are like, hold on, I don't want to get sucked back in. Jordan Peterson has said, like, if you were to quiz Jordan Peterson in a quiet room, just the two of you, he would probably tell you like, yes, I'm full on committed to Jesus. But he's not going to say that publicly because of how resistant he is to the things that have become prevalent in the church culture. He doesn't want to be a part of the mob mentality. He doesn't want to be a part of like the burning pitchforks and walking down the streets. And so to avoid that, he keeps himself in an objective position. But I feel a call or a responsibility or a sympathy to people who, in an effort to resist the hypocrisy that we've seen develop, have lost out with a creator that's still like maybe not done with them, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So if God has a soft spot for people who wrestle, then those people need to know that, because those people are the least likely to fit into a traditional church setting. They're just the least likely. And God's going like, no, I've got a heart for that. So the church in Oregon, Shiloh, is still doing good. It's handed off. I'm a big fan. You should see the pile of firewood they've got outside. They bring in log trucks and unload logs and cut them up. The men go out and cut them up. That was the birthplace like of the 1017 project, the service to the community. So I want to be very clear. I didn't walk away from Shiloh because Shiloh represented the issues that I have with the church at large. The two are completely unconnected. I started to feel like that in my own life, I was being pulled in a direction that was different than they were being pulled. You know, I felt like that my specific thing had to be free. You know, we live in Arizona now. Shiloh exists in Oregon, so that's a problem, right? I mean, 2 states away. But my heart has always been clear communication to people who are on the fence. People are just outside the church. Now, if a church is 10 years old, it's hard to say that it's a place for non-church people when it's been a church for 10 years. There are things about a church that's 10 years old that has to take on some like maintenance, some day-to-day stuff. You know, there's like the hospital visits and the funerals and weddings. I never did weddings. I'll do funerals, but I didn't ever do weddings. Like there was just some things that were fun in the beginning that had started kind of cool. COVID was huge for us because we went strictly digital there for a while, and it blew up and went really, really well. And what I realized was my contribution is probably more communication based than shepherding based. I'm just not a very good day-to-day hand holder at all. And for a church to be effective, it goes back to what I was saying about the people in the airport. Everybody has a story. Nobody wants to be excluded from that. Everybody wants to think that their contribution to the story matters. And I'm probably going to catch some blowback for this. Our church got too big. It grew beyond our ability to efficiently care for the people that were there. I mean, over 1,000 people on holidays. And it's not in a church-rich environment. It's not like they understand that a building with 1,000 people in it is supposed to have pastoral staffs of people. I mean, it was a small, thin staff, and there were some needs that were developing that I wasn't going to be able to reach. And so, to be clear about Shiloh, that is almost separate. I want to put that in a box, because if anybody from Shiloh listens, I had people that were supportive. I had people that loved us. I mean, there were so many people that were in our corner. You also get the idiots, and they get all your attention. Like when you're a leader of something, it seems like the people who cause the problems are always at the front of your mind. And my regret would be, I wish I could go back and spend more time with the people that were like in the trench, shoulder to shoulder with you. I wish they'd had more of my time. Instead, I felt like I was managing the problems. And anyway, back to my point. You say like the church is supposed to do this. You read the Bible, it says this is supposed to be the standard. How many times have you walked into a church and that standard is not being met amongst the people that you know? You're like,
every church I've ever been in.
How much does that bother you?
Infinitely.
Yeah, same. C.S. Lewis said this, and this is the kind of stuff that I want to know. I want to know, is there an answer? Because if I look at the American church, I think we have gotten very behavioral focused because we lost the story, because we've become disconnected from what's the most important. We've started to really drill down on the screws that hold the table together versus the meaning of what's going on there. C.S. Lewis said this. He said, when you look at it at a broad spectrum of people, you can judge any individual in the spectrum and go, they're not living up to their standard. It would be like, do you listen to the Dan Carlin, the
Hardcore History?
Dan Carlin talking about the samurais, he said that it was an expectation you die on the battlefield. So so if you go back to the story, again, I know we're going to get nerdy. I feel like I'm getting nerdy here for a second, but if you understand the story, you know what's important and what's not. So when a group of people collectively understand the story, that's what we would call a culture. Because a culture says this is important to the story, this isn't. When you talked about in the beginning, like some of the standards that we hold ourselves to in our culture, that's an agreed upon story. But if you were to go into the camp with the samurais, there's going to be varying degrees of tough and weak. Like if you were only dealing with only samurais out of 10, you're going to have a varying degree, right? And C.S. Lewis's point about the hypocrisy in the church is that you're going to have exactly that. It's an agreed upon stance, but within that, at an individual level, say person A was going to be just a complete dirtbag. Maybe he's still a dirtbag, but he's a little bit less of a dirtbag. Maybe the things that he was terrible at, he's getting a little bit better at. So if you were to grade him on an individual scale, you can see that his life is slowly, gradually moving in the right direction. Now, compared to this person over here, who would have been a good person regardless? You know, I think of like my wife. My wife is just a good person. Like she just doesn't have struggles. She doesn't have, I swear she's like the first person that's ever been born that just isn't tempted by anything. She just, it's annoying. She's going to be higher on the scale than I am naturally. But if you look at what Jesus, the role of like the church, the standard, the culture that we subscribe to, that she's going to be better based on that. So she's going to look more like what the church would call a Christian than somebody who maybe was down here. But on an individual scale, when you walk into a church and you go, that guy was at the bar Saturday night. Well, that guy was going to be at the bar Saturday night no matter what. But now on Sunday, he's in church. That tells me like there's something going on in his life that's moving the needle in a proper direction. If I'm looking for an excuse, then I could go, he's no better than I am, I'm out. It depends on what your heart is. If your heart is to go, I really want to know what goes on here. So back to Dan Carlin, those samurais, when the war ended and it was peacetime, they decided they were going to take that culture. You know, it's kind of like the cowboy culture right now. How many people that wear a cowboy hat actually do any kind of related cowboy occupation? So few. But the standard and the culture is there, right? And you see people that are wearing like Yellowstone shirts in New York now. But the samurais got moved into the equivalent of like the DMV jobs, but they were like, we're going to take this culture with us of culture of excellence. And they just sucked at it. Like the suicide rates were super high. And I think when you look at the church right now, we were designed to operate over here on the battlefield, spiritual battlefield. And I don't mean kill the bad guys at all. I'm saying sacrifice yourself for what we believe to be true. And I think we have slowly migrated through this love of preference and comfort into a Sunday morning setting that lets us sort of wear the cowboy hat, but we're not very good at assimilating into the DMV. And so you see people who are like, I don't fit into that culture, so I must not be a Christian. And it's like, well, wait a minute. That's not really what this was designed to be. The church was not really in the beginning designed to be a Sunday morning experience. It was really designed to be first responders. It was really designed. So Steve Stone at Milestone Ranch, Google this, you'll love it. Steve Stone, he was the bass player for the Casey Donahue band. He's another one of my comfort blanket type people. He has started creating places for kids who age out of the foster care system. Do you know what you know what the foster care system does if you don't get adopted by 18? The day you turn 18, you know what the foster care system does?
I'm imagining they just put you out.
Homeless shelters.
Yeah.
Drop you off at homeless shelters. There are 400,000 orphans in the United States, somewhere close. You could ask Steve his numbers. Dude, that guy's so fascinating to talk to. Anyway, around 400,000 orphans in the United States. Do you know how many church congregations there are in the United States?
Oh, 400,000.
Exact same number. Yep. So that tells me that the church has started to withdraw from its call and insert itself into these comfortable settings, and we're not very good at it, and it starts to rot. It's kind of like somebody who is like an athlete because of a purpose. You know, like if you're a football player, you go to the gym not because you're trying to take Instagram pictures. It's necessary to the call of what you're doing, right? If you were to take that person and put him in a scenario where he's sitting at a desk every day, what's going to happen to his physical overall appearance? He's going to take on a different shape. He's going to lose a little bit of what made him capable over here. And so Steve has started to create safe spaces for these kids that age out of foster care system. They get jobs. I went out and fed bucking horses with him the other day. We did dinner. He does like a Bible study with them, and they're kids. They're two kids from Detroit, Trey, Quan, and Dre, Dre and Quan. It's important. I really enjoyed getting to sit with these guys because these are kids that aged out of the foster care system. The foster care system failed them. And Dre says, how do we expect that the state is going to raise our kids and have it turn out well. We have surrendered our kids in this country to the government. You go back to child sacrifices in the Old Testament and how Moloch and all the things, how terrible that was. And it's like, wait a minute. What frustrates me is that we are not too far removed from that. We're not killing our children, but we're handing them off. And so we'll scream about the abortion thing, which I realize is a hot topic because anyway, the adoption process doesn't get any press in that same process. And so when I see what the church...
The people who scream about the abortion and the adoption thing literally don't know anything about the whole adoption mess. Like, you actually know something about us. You can educate a lot of people on it. Because again, yeah, abortion's one of those topics you just don't really want to touch it. But if you explain that other side of the coin, the adoption thing, you're about to explain a lot of the details on it. I think that might help people understand why that's such a hot button.
So imagine somebody who is driven by preferences and comfort, what adoption would mean to them, because they're sacrificing peace in their home to a new person. They're sacrificing resources. They're sacrificing their own personal opportunities to the benefit of somebody that's not necessarily family. I mean, the adoption process is in exact opposition to the love of preference. That doesn't mean that it's wrong. It means that we have set it down. If a church was responsible to adopt one person, a church should be able to do that. There should be no need for the state to be responsible to raise our kids that don't have parents. And so that's what when I say I felt like that my life personally, I didn't feel like I was a good fit as the lead pastor anymore, because that church had places it needed to go and it's doing great. But there are places, and I would consider this to be one, there are places where communication has the potential to make an impact, where communicating is a resource. It's currency for the solution.
So the way that I see it and the way that I break it down, if people ask me these questions, right? Because people say a lot of stuff like that. Right now, like, people are like, oh, is there going to be another revolution? Is there going to be another civil war? No, there's not. Not in probably in that physical sense, but our sword, our shield, or our rifle and our bayonet is communication.
Yeah.
The power of this microphone, not this one specifically, but just in general. And I mean, we're seeing it. It doesn't matter which side of you're on. You could be an agnostic. You could be a Jew. You could be a Christian. You could be a leftist. You could be a rightist. You could be a centralist. Our sword and our shield and the way that we fight things now is via communication. Dude,
Dan Carlin again talked about Saint Domingue when it was a slave island, and then they got freed. And like 7-to-3 ratio in the United States, slaves to free people. I didn't know that. I didn't realize there was that much. But what you see is like the slaves at any point could have risen up and taken over at any point. And the reason they didn't was there wasn't a trunk of communication. They didn't want to be the one to jump out there and do it on their own and get their head cut off. And so as a result, they kept themselves enslaved. And I think this is hugely symbolic to where we are. They kept themselves enslaved. Not kept themselves, they weren't responsible, but I'm saying that they weren't allowed to free themselves from that because there wasn't a trunk of communication. If there was a leader that stood up with a clear voice that everybody could rally behind and go, that is collectively our culture. A little left, a little right, but basically that's the idea. Then what you're doing is you're creating a culture that says this is important, this isn't. Our preferences aren't important, our freedom is. And they could have absolutely dominated what Saint Domingue, they became Haiti. The United States could have been completely taken over, and there were books being written about don't push them too hard because this is what will happen. So to your point, if there's a need for people to begin to unite, it's going to require that there's a voice somewhere. Somebody somewhere has to have a vision or clear.
We need that so bad in the Christian faith, and so bad. And I mean, to me, the thing that I keep finding myself going back to is Catholicism is the first version of Christianity in all actuality. I mean, not just necessarily Catholicism, but really that was kind of where it all started. And I mean, then all these Protestant religions, which is Protestant. If you're non-denominational, technically you're Protestant, right?
Okay.
Technically, where they remove certain books of the Bible. And so the Catholic faith is actually an interesting one. And I'm not saying I'm Catholic, but it is an interesting one to study. Like, that's what I'm studying right now is Catholicism and Islam, because Catholicism is the oldest version of Christianity in theory. It's the first Christian religion. And they put in a lot of these different things. I mean, the way the Catholic Church is structured, is so much different than the way Protestant churches are. Like, there's no mega Catholic churches, really. I mean, there's so many different things you have to do to be a part of the Catholic faith. And some of it's crazy. Some of it's a little out of control. But it's also lost a lot of its power. And I think that's why Islam is the number one religion in the world, is because of what you're talking about. There is a non-tolerance there. And there is this is what they stand up for. They have a clear leadership, and people gravitate
It's not
towards
preference driven. It's
not preference driven at all. In fact, the preferences are almost non-existent, right? It's like, and there's extremists in that. But I've met some Muslim people who are really excellent people.
Yeah,
they are.
Well,
there's extremists in that
and
faith.
smart. There are some smart Muslims.
Scary smart.
Definitely. So here's my thought. I mean, there's two philosophies to live by. You can live in a philosophy of openness or a philosophy of skepticism, and I trend towards skepticism. I struggle with that. I tend to be more skeptical